Steven, let's start at the very basics of logistics and moving things from place A to place B. Can you explain to us each and every step that happens when someone has to transport materials from point one to point two? Like what are the various things involved? And I'd love for us to deep dive into each of those steps.
Sure. Yeah, no, please stop me if you want me to expand. There's a lot of transactional points to what I call life of a shipment. And it really starts with the origin of, in the US, I generally don't like to use Incoterms because they're not regulatory in nature. So in the US, we use what's called a routed and a non-routed transaction, which simply breaks down the transaction to only two parties, either a US party or a foreign party contracting. They buy something either here and I want to ship it abroad, or vice versa, buy something overseas and want to import it in. But specifically, I want to talk about export because there's a lot of, it's my subject matter area, but there's a lot more, I think, risk. I think I always say Uncle Sam cares more from a commodity perspective, what's going out than what's coming in. What's coming in is more classification, determination. But for national security reasons and just, kind of staying ahead of the game, they really focus on that. So, once a customer comes to a company like ours, we're freight forwarders. So we're essentially not handling personal effects, but commercial goods that need to go from, like you said, point A to point B, sometimes point A to point B to point C. And that really starts with determining if it's a routed or non-routed transaction, which then starts the conversation of, okay, is this customer in our system? Are they, financials aside, whether they have letter of credit, or do they have a power of attorney on record with us? Because we can't do anything without moving forward with that. We do allow customers to use a shipper's letter of instruction if they sign it each and every time, but that's very rare. A lot of U.S. companies that export predominantly throughout the year will use a POA because it's essentially an overall contract to not only transport their goods, but also to file what we call EEI or customs data with US CBP on their behalf. So they're
Oh,
giving us the data to file.
so you guys are also the customs broker for them? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
So,
and that can change sometimes. Like larger companies will have multiple freight forwarders, as we know that hacks happen, disruptions in systems happen, so they're always very fluid. But generally, they always have a favorite. And I've seen over the years, when it comes to brokerage, especially, a lot of companies focusing solely on one company doing the filings. They might use multiple companies for the transport. They could use a DHL or an Apex or something like that. But when it comes to the filing, because it's really about consistency and skill, it's something that seems so, innocuous. We're just transposing data from a document to a system, whether it be our internal TMS or the US Customs system. As I've seen in the past in my 10 years, that's a huge, huge risk area. And it doesn't matter if the commodity is missiles or it's pencils. If the data is wrong, it's wrong. So I've seen instances where in the industry where people have been using the wrong, maybe Schedule B number for 5 years, and then they have 10,000 shipments that they have to go back and update because by law, once you have to. So once you get that customer onboarded properly, you have that POA in place, you have, your quotes are now accepted, I would say. Sometimes this business is run by RFQs and RFIs, but generally speaking, when those transactions start up, we're relying heavily on the customer to provide us clear, accurate, and concise information from the get-go. I mean, that's really where we, I guess, specialize as in making sure that they have all their documentation in place. We can call out from I'd say, customer care aspect. We'll look over their documents and notice if something missing. We'll go back to them, of course, but we're not necessarily going to be able to help them determine whether their products are subject to certain regulations, export policies, sanctions, and embargoes. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But I think that's something that we really push operations to challenge, or what we call our key account managers, to make sure that if there are issues, we get them handled right away. I'm always a big proponent of initial onboarding of a customer after all documents are signed, before we even start shipments, to sit down and be a compliance aspect of the conversation, to maybe get some of those questions out of the way early of what we can and we can't do contractually or for a customer, like I said, care aspect. But we won't take on liability for things that are just not in our scope. So I like to get that out in front. And I'm not calling out sales, but sales sometimes will overpromise and, to try to get the customer, that's their job. We want that. But I want to make sure I'm there to make sure hey, we don't want to expose ourselves to unnecessary risk and things of that nature. So I think just aligning everybody on the same call helps answer those questions before they become either an issue, a showstopper, points of contention. So I generally like to be on there early on and then also have my counterpart, if available, on the customer side. So we speak the same language, essentially, as you
Yeah.
know.
So just in that portion, Stephen, if I may pause. So you would not take liability for things like whether the ECCN number is correct or the HS code or the export code is correct or not. That is on the exporter company. Like, is that the right example for something that you would not be responsible for?
Correct. Yeah, that's I mean, just the onus of responsibility if you get that wrong, because we're not the engineers, we're not the scientists, we're not the manufacturers. So for us to answer or to really determine, I do have a background in that. I worked in, as we spoke before, in satellite communication, satellite defense. So I'm used to being the shipper in a very controlled commodity. So I know what weight that carries. And when I got into freight forwarding, I'm like, no, no, no. Like I know the game, and that's on you guys. But that doesn't go to say that I've been in organizations where the operational team is so used to working with that customer, they'll see an ECCN that might not look right or an HTS code they've never seen before, and they won't challenge it, but they'll call it out. And I've seen with one customer, they were using, and it was going to a pretty sensitive area, the wrong ECCN, which it was more controlled. So we called it out. They said, oh, no, 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 that's not right. Thank you. And there was a major customer, lots of volume, I think 2 or 3 thousand shipments a month. So I called out the team that in my Chicago branch at the time. I said, that's exactly what we want to do. We don't want to tell them, but we want to non-binding, answer and kind of lead them to water. Say, hey, we saw this, but also look at your whole shipment again, just to
Yeah.
ensure, kind
Yeah.
of pass that
Yeah.
buck a little bit.
Got it. So you wouldn't take liability. That makes sense on what is being shipped or the codes associated with what's being shipped. But because you're a freight forwarder, you are responsible for making that item reach a certain destination, right? So would you
Yes.
then look at the destination and the receiver and look at those items, or is that also going to be the responsibility of the exporter and your job is really to move it from A to B, but does it matter to you whom you're moving it to?
Back in the day, I'd say 10, 20 years ago, that would have always only really been put the onus placed on the shipper. Now that is not the case. It is KYC, know your customer. The government expects freight forwarder, especially because they call us the last line of review, the last line of defense, that if we see something, we must say something. We must report it. And I've seen shipments in my past where I have received documentation from my branch and they said, hey, something doesn't look right here. They may be popped up on our denied party screening. The match looks legit. And then I'll look into it and there is concern there. And maybe it was missed on their end. Maybe it was a business decision because at the time some of these shipments were allowable, but maybe not in the future after that because the company was on a watch list and then went to so there is a lot of pressure put on freight forwarders, especially nowadays, where they look at us where if we see something and don't say something, they use that as like a mitigating circumstance against us to go after us. And that's Department of State, Department of Commerce, OFAC, when it comes to financial transactions. So yeah, it's a lot to do with our systems and what we pick up. And we have to have that conversation with the customer. I mean, it's just obviously customer service 101, but it's also to make sure that we're clear. And then if you think this is allowable, I will get in writing full details of what their synopsis and why their determination and solution for getting the shipment to where it's going and using us is allowable. So it's a really, really interesting conversation nowadays, especially depending who's in office in the U.S. And in other foreign countries, what's going on politically. We have wars and conflicts all over the place. So it really throws this new wrench that we've really never experienced, I think, years ago, where it was, I just think the regulations have gotten a lot tighter and the US government agencies have gotten a lot larger and have used, as we'll get into later, more AI and e-commerce tools. So,
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So we were at the point where you take the power of attorney, you do your checks, you warn the customer of any risks,
mhm.
and okay, what happens after that?
So after that, I guess it goes really onto the operational team where they're creating the bookings, whether it be with a carrier, air carrier, ocean carrier, the trucker to get it from maybe our warehouse or another warehouse. Maybe it's a project. It's got multiple pickups. So that's where they really come in with their expertise. And it's almost like watching the stock market. I've seen it in real time. These air export agents and supervisors literally cutting deals with airlines for space, and it's by weight, by all these factors and data elements kind of go into the decision whether to use one carrier or another, or maybe it's speed. A lot of these shipments, you can have an airplane on ground shipment, an AOG shipment, where the more it's the longer it's sitting on in the warehouse, that plane wherever in the world is not going to fly. So it's costing the customer money. So speed, but also you can't let that skirt compliance. I'm actually speaking at a conference later in the year and down in Florida. And my topic is that whether how business and compliance, the pressures, how the synergy can sometimes, alter that path, whether it be good or bad. So
Got
I
it.
think that's really important.
Got it. So the mode of moving something, whether it's air, ocean, is decided not beforehand. It's decided at a later point. Is that how it works?
That's usually early on once because some customers do both. Depends on, like I said, the speed of the shipment, the weight. Maybe it can't travel via plane, whether it be passenger or air cargo, whether dangerous goods and things of that nature, oversized. But yeah, that's really determined at the point of quote. And usually a lot of this stuff isn't quote business. It'll be a quote initially and then continued business. We see a lot of the same, especially in my company now, a lot of the same customers, a lot of the same products. So we're very proficient in knowing exactly what their wants and needs are when it comes to carriers and ground handlers, whether it be here or destination. So yeah, getting that whole, I'd say, supply chain connected. That's where the freight forwarder really comes into play. It's connecting the dots and then using the rates, the contracts we have to get the best price for us, so we can get the best price for our customer. So it's and it changes daily as we know.
Got it. Got it.
So it's
And
very critical.
I have a question then on your business model, which is, are you looking at every shipment as a separate transaction and hence you earn a fee on that transaction individually? Or because you have the same customer shipping the same products, do you also offer some type of a subscription fee where you can do X number of shipments for the same cost, and that way there is a consistency for the client, and perhaps you need to absorb, or your profit and losses may go up and down, but there's consistency for the person who is shipping it.
Absolutely. Our larger customers, we work off of what we call like rate cards. So that's what the agreed upon rate we gave them in the contract. That's very industry standard, very boilerplate. But as we've seen over the last couple of months, that really gets contentious.
Yes.
So the airlines were pretty good in the beginning, from what I read, about not pushing too much of the variance costs back on the freight forwarders. They were generally, because we all work together. They need us, we need them. But then at the end of the day, months go by, that can change. And so normally I would say a freight forwarder would probably eat some of that, especially for a larger customer,
Mm.
where we have this fixed rate. Yes, the force majeure, things of acts of God are going on, but we have to maintain our level of business and service for them. And that does include pricing, because they're also basing their numbers and their projections for the year based on that. And especially when you're moving large volumes, that those little pennies really add up. So yeah, it's a difficult one to give like a firm answer on, but I would say carriers and freight forwarders generally work together in those points of crisis and generally don't pass it on to the customers unless it would be really egregious or to an area where it's so sensitive. As I saw in the past with Ukraine, where we had to get special insurance. This is at my previous stops, but we had to get special insurance for any products. I think these are like cell phones and clothing, just to get the products into the country. And then
Mm.
now they're in a war zone. So what
Mm.
insurance agencies can, so those kind of things, those were increased costs we had to pass on to the customer. We said, hey, if you want to do business here, you have to understand that.
Yeah, yeah. No, makes sense. Especially when your infrastructure pricing is changing, your own pricing will have to adapt, or you then have to go have that conversation with the customer for sure. So we've got to the point where, okay, we decided whether it's air or ocean, and we've got that set up. What's really the difference between air and ocean, just in terms of paperwork, operations for you guys? Like, what's easier, what's harder about each of them?
I would say air is so contentious on the speed of what is going on and where the customer is looking to go, versus ocean. You have time. You have sometimes you can have a month out till something sales. So I think it really comes down to the product and commodity and the need of where it's going. As we've seen with clothing, let's say coming from Asia Pac. That could take a while, but they get such great rates going via ocean because the clothes are, relatively well priced. So that's how they do it. It could take, a month to get here, but it's making 6 stops at different ports and whatever. But the main difference is speed. Documentation is very similar. Your seaway bill, your airway bill, your parties, your bill to parties, those are all generally the same. But also, again, there's a level of risk there. So you want to make sure you're using the right carrier, whether it be air or ocean, for the product, where it's going. Transshipping, that's a big one. People, especially air, is easy as we see. Oh my God, it's going through this intermediate airport, which is sensitive to this destination, which is non-sensitive. But ocean, people forget. Even if you don't, your product, especially depending on the country, the product doesn't get off the boat, but calls the port. It is still subject sometimes to international law, or I'm sorry, that country's laws. I saw it years ago with a shipment of pharmaceuticals from Brazil to Vancouver. And it wasn't, I don't think it was intended to stop in Los Angeles, but it had to call the port. And there was pharmaceuticals on board. And some of them were classified under our law, because now they're in our port under DEA regulations, meaning to export, meaning they're not getting off the boat, but they're in our port, they're going to leave. That's an export. They had to get a DEA permit, so that was an operational challenge. Now, there's no U.S. party to say, hey, we'll handle, this is a Brazilian company to a Vancouver pharmaceutical company. So those challenges are what I see in my line of work, and trying to work through those with the customer. And they're never they're very time consuming. They're never quick, but we always usually find a solution. The government knows these things happen. They have
Mm.
to kind of give you the skills and the tools to work with to get out of the problem. But yeah, now it could take several months. I've seen things take a year to clear, and the product isn't even good anymore, so there's a lot of challenges there when it comes to just knowing where things are going and watching the transshipping. We'll get into it later with kind of, I'd say electronic and EDI and AI, but systems now are able to check routings and carriers based on commodities, which I think is fantastic. It really takes the gun out of the hand of the air export, ocean export agent, where we train them. I'm actually hosting a training tomorrow on specifically export controls, what to look out for, best practices. But, you're sitting there doing your day to day. They're not always thinking of that. That's not, we're all compliance. I always say that. I'm not just compliant, but sometimes it's like just not frontal lobe information. Sometimes you're just like speed of getting shipments out. That business pressure, like I said, can cause those issues. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so those
No,
are they're not much different.
yeah, that's
They're both
fascinating
risky.
though. When like a company is in Brazil and it's shipping things to Canada and it assumes that it's just going to go straight to Canada, but then it goes off to any country, in this case the US, and it's just bad luck, right? Like that you're going to get stuck there for no foreseeable fault of the exporting company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess things continue to stay interesting
Well, I have
when
another one for air. It was an export of shotguns out of the U.S., which are not very controlled, surprisingly. Sporting shotguns. They
yeah,
were going to, I think, Switzerland, some kind of sporting goods,
yeah,
a Bass Pro Shop in the US, or Dick's Sporting Good.
yeah,
And again, wasn't planned to, but the flight went from, I believe, JFK into Luxembourg, which is very, very sensitive to, they call weapons of war, just that whole region, really. And smartly so, you want to know. But these items never got off the plane, but through e-manifest systems, they were aware of it and took it right off. And they had, again, at the company I was working at the time, we were German owned. So we were able to get some compliance tools over there but we had to get an export license to get it out of Luxembourg into Switzerland. So
wow,
just another way. And I don't want to bash carriers, but a
yeah,
lot of issues we have with carriers is that routing sometimes and that's maybe environmental, weather related.
yeah, yeah.
We never know. Those are mistakes.
Mhm.
But when it comes to crossing borders with rail, sometimes they'll cross at a border that the rail company just doesn't notify us. And they say, that's not our job. You should be checking the booking, which is true too. But we have people in operations working they do one shipment, they're on to the next one. They're not checking, did this go through Detroit or did it go through Portal, North Dakota? And at the last minute, it changed. Now, US Customs has these targeting systems. And when we say, hey, it's going to Detroit and it doesn't, that match doesn't work, it's an easy penalty for us. So carriers, we've always had relationships that are, built on, working together, but also sometimes, we have to do a little more work on our end in order just to stay compliant, where we
Yeah,
wish maybe they'd be a little more forthcoming with certain information.
got
But
it.
it's rare. It's not always all the time.
Got it. But tell me something. Detroit versus some other city within the US is still within the US, right? So why would that become an issue?
I'm sorry, export going through Canada or through Mexico because there's
Oh,
so
okay.
many ports. Sometimes
Yeah.
that'll change. These rail yards are just humongous, and
Got it.
they're like veins. So
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
on a track, and then they can switch a track, and then they're in North Dakota instead of Michigan, like just like that.
Got it.
So
Got
it
it.
makes
So
no
then,
rhyme or reason, but
yeah. So there's a perception that it's being falsified and you're actually sending it to somewhere else. That's how the evidence trail looks like, but it was because of the railway deciding to go a different route.
right. And we didn't check on our end.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's not common to always
Mm.
check. So,
Yeah.
I've always challenged operations. I just say it as a talking point,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's being done. These people are overworked,
It's a
and,
tough one.
as
It's a
we
tough
know,
one.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if there's any tech for that because it would be an interesting one to build.
Like notifications, exactly. Something
Yeah. Yeah.
internal. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm a very big proponent as
Yeah.
well as AI and automation, not because I want to eliminate humans, but I want to make sure these
Yeah.
humans have
Yeah.
jobs and have all the
Yeah.
tools and can work quickly,
Yeah,
more quickly.
absolutely. So then we discussed air versus ocean and some of these differences and similarities. What happens after that? So let's say that you've put the goods on the ship or on the airplane. Let's assume there's a sunny side scenario. It's taken the right route and now it's about to reach the destination. Talk us through what happens during the journey. Like what are you guys looking for, monitoring and so on?
So I think it really depends on where it's going, and even before it clears, you can have. We've seen very commonly over the last, say, 5 years, customs holds, and they've always been a thing, U.S. customs hold, but now they're more prevalent because what I've seen is U.S. before the item leaves, there is a lot of electronic interface with our systems or custom systems, and they're monitoring and reviewing the commodity and the destination. And if they don't feel comfortable with, because of all these different, like I said, political things going on and sanctions, they will hold the shipment. And what I've seen is they will contact the other agency that oversees those goods. So there are two agencies we know as the Department of Commerce or BIS. They oversee our commercial and dual use. And then you have Department of State or DDTC, which oversees what we call ITAR or U.S. military weapons of war kind of thing. And so if there's any kind of question where customs, because at the end of the day, they're releasing the product to wherever. If they don't feel comfortable, they're going to hold the shipment and they're going to hold it until they have a discussion with that agency. And that's very new. I feel like that's over the last few years, especially servers, drones, things, really, really sensitive items, especially where they're going. And so I think that's a hurdle that's quite new, and other freight forwarders could probably back me up, but I've seen just a big spike there. So once it actually clears that, and I've even seen once it clears and it's that destination getting called back. So that's also new as well, where we have to bring the item back from destination for review, which we've done, and it's expensive, but you have to, because if you don't produce that, you're looking at a fine up to, I think it's about $280,000. So very
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah.
So from there, we're looking at really operations is making sure all the times, the service levels, the speed of what we promised or the time frame of what the good is going to get there is going to get there. So we do a lot of, and we have our system, our dashboards for our customers that, and a lot of freight forwarders now do too, where they can actively track their package. But we also have some that like to be told, so we don't mind doing that as well.
Got it. Got it. So you have detailed granular tracking of where a particular item is at any given point in time. Whenever a customer calls, you can tell them, hey, it's over here. I guess in that life of the shipment, you can actually trace the journey of that shipment as it's going through the air or the ocean.
Yes, we'll also know because of a lot of the electronic systems that put in place abroad, whether there's going to be an issue at the port or the airport, which I think is great. We can clear quicker, but also you have to have expertise in that area. I've seen with the Middle East, I've seen with Asia Pac, South America, there's a lot of different conversations going on. Another hurdle. So I think the strength of a freight forwarder is their export program, but also the importing party and it off and say, hey, it's there, but there's some issues. So we got to get it end to end. So
Correct.
yeah, it's interesting.
So, what do you do in that case? For example, does your company hire specifically local folks in all these possible destinations, or do you have a partner? How do you approach it? Because ultimately, to the customer that you have, they expect the shipment to be delivered by you to the final destination.
Yeah, now the larger areas, the larger countries, we have operations. So it's, my company to my company. Smaller areas or areas we're going to have representation, we'll either have an authorized agent or you said like a partner where they are experts in clearing that cargo, dealing with customs officials, things of that nature, legally, obviously. But that's something that when in smaller areas or areas we're not really prominent in could cause a lot of issues because you're just not speaking that same customs language. So we're kind of learning on the fly. But yeah, I think it's paramount to have what I call an in-house network where you're working together. And that's happens. I should have mentioned that early on. When you are working with your overseas party, if it's a routed transaction where the foreign party is requesting the item to be exported, we are normally getting our destination office coming to us. Here's all the information. Here's the shipping documents. And then we're handling it all internally. So it's very clean. Whereas sometimes if it's a US shipper exporting and it's to an area we're not used to, that could sometimes be a challenge. But again, if we have that office over there, it's very easy.
Okay, got it. And you just mentioned documents there. For each of these steps, earlier on you mentioned the power of attorney, which the customer is going to give you. But when you have to clear it from customs at the origin, there's probably a bunch of documents that need to be given. So how does the document exchange or document handover happen? And what are the documents that you need to ensure are available on the destination side also? Because there's no person carrying these with them, right? So the goods are there on their own. There's no caretaker in that sense. So how does the country that's receiving these goods know whom do they go to, and like what is the sort of documentation they need to see and by whom?
So I think the big ones are the airway bill, seaway bill, and the certificate of origin for the product. That's a very, very important document because some countries don't work with other countries. And if they know these products are from that country, they need proof it's not. So the proof is the manufacturer, certificate of origin. I would say, we do have a lot of advanced data now or advanced sending of data. So and I'll get into that later, but that's got to be extremely accurate, or else you're going to experience, I'd say, congestion at the port, where you will get either sidelined or pulled for review, maybe denied entirely because you didn't report it correctly, and it's something that can't even go there. So yeah, I'd say certificate of origin, the commercial invoice, dangerous goods. You want to have a STS, dangerous goods declaration. STS being the safety data sheet, especially with the ports for safety. And I'd say if you have denied party screening results, those are always effective. They'll probably do their own, obviously, but it shows the chain of security and that we've done our due diligence going into their country, protect both sides. There's bad actors in America as well. So yeah, I would say those are the most important documents, the standard shipping documents. Some things they can have, obviously, electronic information from customs. The SLI is now a protected I think it always has been, but I talked to US Census a couple years ago because there was a customer that just did SLIs. They didn't do POAs and they rarely used, they had commercial invoice, but their main document was the SLI. And the overseas party, which they owned, it was a large healthcare company, they wanted a copy of the SLI. And I said, but that's the information we're transposing with customs. I said, we're told by customs to protect that data, but this paper that technically is a preform, it's data that hasn't been entered yet, but its purpose is to enter the data. So we got into a little bit of back and forth about, and they're like, you know what? I'm not saying that I was right, but they're like, yeah, you know what? Treat that document as it is the data already, that it's been transmitted. Some things can change, obviously. And we would change the record if customer told us to, but technically you're taking that document, putting into, and that, so those things should go hand in hand. So if you have that SLI document, technically you're breaching confidentiality laws with the US government. So I've been on a tear the last few years on making sure that document is not shared as well as the EEI record. And it's a challenge sometimes with operations because they'll have all these people in copy for these emails and they're free flowing documents back and forth. But if you don't check those end users and you have people in other countries, you have just broken 30.6D. It's a confidentiality law and it's punishable by fines. And if you do it enough, you can lose your ability to export. because census protects that information with customs so much that even another government agency outside of those two would need a subpoena to get that data. And the reason that I've always been told is we protect that data because the customer in the US and the foreign customer is telling us this information out of trust. They can easily, because the US government cannot track everything, they can easily say this pallet is pencils when it's not, to skirt, laws and sanctions, monetary value, undervalue goods. So that's a huge protection initiative by them to make sure that data is just kept within the US shipper and the authorized freight forwarder if they use one, which they usually do. Whether they're filing with customs themselves, some shippers do, and we're just doing the logistics, or if we're doing both. So, but we have that POA in place to protect us and them. There's a civil and criminals liability clause in there for a reason. So,
Wow. Wow. I actually wanted to check with you because when coordination happens, a lot of emails go back and forth. So there must be certain documents that absolutely cannot be shared. But at the same time, what are the documents that the receiving party needs to produce so that they know that, so that the destination country can authorize that particular shipment to be handed over to them?
So they have to be named on the documents, but that goes two ways. So we have, which used to be, well, no, they still are, our export licenses with the Department of State and Department of Commerce. So people always thought, because it's a sensitive license, it's many pages. I've done them before. It's the commodity, what it's made of, kind of what its details, ECCN value, and it tells you basically this shipment is controlled because of this. We're going to give you 5 years of exporting ability and let's say $5 million, whatever runs out first. So if you don't use it all in 5 years, it's expired. But if you use it all in 3 years, the 5 million, it's expired when the 5 million's done. So that license was always looked at as very protected, which it is, kind of a need to know. But then there was a lot of issues with customs overseas, especially I saw with Germany, more of these advanced countries when it comes to weaponry and things they want to know about coming into their country. And who's the authorized party to pick up these goods? Because let's say you have a missile or missile technology, you can't just have Joe Schmo come to the airport and pick it up. So that license became, especially the Department of State license, there's a block that lists authorized forwarders. And if you're not on there, and I've seen it now, because we've become, the US obviously does a lot of defense trade. These customs offices all over the world now are very attuned to our products. And when they see certain things, they go, where's the export license? So they know to call out when they see like an ITAR, instead of an ECCN, we use for military, we use the ITAR code, the USML code. It's Roman numerals. Whereas the ECCN doesn't look like that at all. So they've just had these little triggers. And the first thing they look at, okay, are you listed as the party for not only customs clearance, but also pickup? And everything has to be, the name has to be the most current. The address has to be active. I've seen lots of issues with that where a company was no longer at address in Germany or their name had changed over the last 10 years, but the customer in the US keeps using. So that the big thing is the documentation must match. And if it doesn't, you're just opening yourself up to ridicule, to scrutinization. So I think before the shipment even leaves, it's hammering down those parties. The pickup party, the customs clearance. Sometimes you have two. You have, hey, we're just handling the clearance of the airport, and then another freight forwarder is picking it up. So there's a lot of changing hands there where it could be multiple parties just picking up the thing or clearing it, which I've seen that's very common. Some strengths and weaknesses sometimes will bring that to kind of the forefront where this freight forwarder is very good at clearance, but we have this dedicated trucker that maybe the customer always uses, trusts, it's vetted out. You have this commodity, they're supposed to go to the warehouse, they never show up. And now you have these very sensitive goods out in the middle of nowhere in the black market. And their name obviously is going to go out there. So it's exposure and a risk there. So yeah, I think just vetting your parties, not only from a sanction and embargoes point of view, but also making sure that they're listed on the appropriate documentation. And even on the import side, a lot of these things need import licenses. It's not just the US saying it can go, it's a company accepting, or the country accepting it. So making sure you align with those overseas parties to make sure their documentation is in order.
Wow. Super interesting, super complex, especially when it's multiple hops and then you have a last mile and then you get the to get to the actual receiver or the recipient. And this entire piece, Stephen, how much do you think there has been a digitization of documentation through this entire life of a shipment, just in terms of a percentage? What do you think that is today?
I would say for what I've seen in the last 10 years with 3 different large freight forwarders, everybody's going paperless. Everybody's going e-manifest, electronic documents, SharePoints, clouds, everything, yes, we still keep documents on the freight physically, but that's, in my opinion, never supposed to be the document set used. Because I've seen issues in the past where, I don't want to call it the company, but it was a large manufacturer of airplane engines.
Mhm.
And they were foreign, but they had a 3PL, 4PL maybe here that was doing the packing, the labeling, everything in their warehouse. And they were a freight forwarder service that they offered. And they were a little archaic when it came to going electronic. So they would print out these large books of documents, basically. And these are controlled engines. These are going on fighter crafts. So very sensitive. And I got into a very challenging call with that company, not the manufacturer, but the way that the documents were being delivered to us. So they would go from their warehouse to our warehouse. And then our air export team were told to go out, retrieve the documents from the parcel, scan them, upload them in, which included the license from the Department of State, which again, these are very critical documents. What if it's missing? What if the SLIs miss? Dangerous goods were involved sometimes. What if those were missing? And then from that, we were supposed to file EEI. And there were a few times where I caught some shipments that were licensable, had no license information. I went back to the challenge the branch. Where's the license information? There was no license with the shipment. So from then, that was 2 or 3 years ago, which was shocking. And they were like, basically they were challenging me on they can only print right now and blah, blah, blah. So, that's an instance of why everybody's doing paper now and why everybody's paperless and why everybody's pushing electronic documents, and also for speed, automation. Some things, as we've seen, are going through AI, where it can scan documents, pull information, call out missing information. So we're more efficient that way. So
Yeah.
I'd say like 95% of our business. Some things we do paper files more for auditing. That's for me, really. My branches are great with that. I go in, I'm like, give me 20 files, and I can just sit there. I'm more of a paper guy when it comes to that. But yeah, I'd say with the speed of things and the way that things change, as we've seen that shipments and customer requests can change in an instant, that documentation needs to be in our hands ASAP. So we can make, what if it already exported? And now we have to go
Yeah.
back in the system and update the customs
Yeah.
filing, So, because now we're all, in it together on that one,
Yeah.
because we've reported incorrect information. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say it's paramount right now.
Got it. Got
Not only
it.
for efficiency, more for auditing as well.
Yeah, no, that's great that we're almost there in terms of completely going paperless. So when that happens, are there challenges between in talking between different systems? Because I'm guessing so let's say a shipment is going from the US to Germany, and now you have to get the US customs declaration filed. Your system, maybe things that you guys have built, could interact with the US customs system. But are there any breaking points while independently it is digital? Is the entire life of a shipment so-called like completely digital as well?
I would say it's funny because it's not only abroad. Some countries are different when it comes to physical documentation, things in pouches, consularized, notarized. I've seen, but even in our own U.S. ports, I've seen prior to export where we have to physically present certain shipments to certain customs ports. Miami, notorious for military and cars, needing certain documentation in person. Los Angeles, LAX, same thing. Department of State license, they need it the day before in person, which was a thing 20 years ago, but some offices, they're not wrong. They still keep that practice up. So I've seen there, it's almost preference, but then I've seen on the on the communication side where systems don't talk to each other from the get-go correctly, or we're trying to implement a foreign system for reporting reasons into our own TMS. And I think ICS2. I always forget that acronym. When that came into play a couple of years ago, our internal TMS now had to connect with this foreign requirement and then also transmit. It was really to the airline to ICS2, but we start the chain of data. So that was a challenge where, we were coming, it was character issues, spacing issues, things just not lining up when it comes to EDI interface. I think that's always an issue with anything new. But yeah, I've seen it's always headaches when something, something launches like that. And the best thing to do for a government is to give large grace periods and non punitive grace periods after that, where, okay, test, okay, now we're live, still grace period. And then once you see the industry is caught up, it's proficient, the bugs have been worked out, then you can go after non-compliance and
Yeah.
things of that nature. But I think it's got to be everybody working together, and we really need our governments to ensure that they have to stand up for industry, because we're industry. I'm on a couple of industry type committees, but we talk, but the government's got to be the one to make the initiative,
Yeah.
to make the action happen.
Yeah.
So that's where
Yeah.
we rely on them, and I think
Got-
that's the smoothest way to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. No, this has been amazing.
Mm.
Stephen, just in closing, I usually like to ask this. What's a trade story from your career that you would like to share with your grandkids, which will make them go, "Oh, wow, that's pretty
So yeah, and I was as I was saying before, my first I was in the military, and then I went to college, so I really didn't know what I was going to do, and I kind of fell into compliance, like I was telling you. I was in contract review, entry level out of college, and let's just say I was not very good at it. Maybe just a lack of interest. But I started working on a project for Sudan. They had just recently been kind of unrestricted in certain areas, and telecom was one of them. So, I was given a project to look into certain areas in Sudan and where we can do certain things. And I loved the project. We actually didn't even go forward with it. I worked on it for 2 weeks, but I really fell in love with trade compliance. So about a month later, my general counsel I reported to said, "Hey, you did good with that project. We have a need there. It's called trade compliance. We basically." And I looked it up. I had to Google it, I think, that day. And she's like, that's essentially what you did. You're monitoring political and sanctions and all these kind of moving parts. And that's kind of how my brain works. I have to be engaged or else I get disengaged pretty easily. So it was about a month later after that when I kind of took over. Luckily, our treasurer was very astute in compliance, especially export compliance. She had done it for like 20 years while doing treasury. Very bright woman. So she really was like my backbone. Anything I just needed, she would help me out with. So they came to me and they said, "Hey, we have a very sensitive project to North Korea. It's to support UNICEF." So it was this humanitarian mission. It's telecom equipment that's going to go to Pyongyang. They're going to set up these kind of tents and do kind of health checkups for children, inoculation, anything they needed. It's a really great mission, I thought. But I started like, okay, what's the issue? They're like, well, we need an export license. I'm like, okay, that seems easy enough. So I start, I go to the engineers and I go, okay. And I get all the documentation I need because these things are really robust when it comes to information. So we submit it. And I don't know anything about anything at this point. I've always loved like history and social studies, but I did not keep my fingers on the pulse of the world.
Yeah.
And even when I was in the army, I was over in the middle. I was just kind of a guy doing a thing. So
Yeah.
so about 6 weeks later, we get the license back. It's approved. All these contingencies, though. We have to. If there's anything that goes wrong, we have to have egress plans, and so it's a very unique license. So at the time, first one comes in, I make a copy of it, I put it in a frame. It's on my desk. And then just now, years later, being a freight forwarder, I come back and I look at that because it's on my wall in my office. I just look at that. I go, the first license I ever got was one of the most restricted countries in the world,
Yeah.
and we were able to help people. The project went great, and but I just kind of at the time brushed it off as like something I had to do on a Monday, not knowing my first Department of Commerce license was with North
Yeah.
Korea, and it was
Yeah.
successful and returned pretty quickly. For usually it's like 4 to 8 weeks. We got it back in 6, and no red
Wow.
lines. So it was a
Amazing.
pretty cool for compliance,
Yeah.
pretty cool
Yeah.
story. Yeah,
No,
so
that's an amazing
that's
story.
that's for the grandkids.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Stephen, this has been amazing and very, very educational. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing with us. And yeah, lovely to hear all the stories. And there's so much that you need to be aware of and super alert when it comes to your day to day. Hats off to you guys who are in freight, and thanks for helping the world.
Thank you. No, and I really got to call you out and love that you bring this topic to the forefront. There are a lot of people out there like me that, we're all doing the same thing some days and we think we're alone, and you're really not. It's our industry. And then when you
Yeah,
get a couple of people talking about it, you go, yeah, I'm doing the same thing. So I really applaud you for making this a topic, and really enjoyed it. Maybe collaborate in the future, but
yeah,
really generally loved this conversation. So appreciate you having me today.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Steven. Take care.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.